Please take your seats and silence all cell phones. The program is about to begin. Please welcome Rebecca Vallas, Jack Smalligan, Henry Claypool, Dom Kelly, and Darren Webb.
Well, thank you. Was super appreciating the Harkin folks for giving us some really good, hype music to open up. We were over here kind of dancing in the segue. Got to have good music for conferences. Thank you so much for being with us today. And my name is Rebecca Vallas. I have the pleasure and privilege of being the fairly new Chief Executive Officer of the National Academy of Social Insurance, which is a nationwide network of about 1,300 of the nation's leading experts on social insurance. I sometimes say that I come to this work as a recovering public benefits lawyer who didn't recover very well, because that is how I got into this work many years ago. And my passion area of practice as a lawyer was representing low-income people with disabilities who were having trouble accessing SSI and Social Security disability benefits. So that's my entry point into these conversations and into the Academy's work. I have a really phenomenal panel with me today, all of whom are involved in various ways with Academy work that you're going to hear about in a moment. But I just want to say we had such a terrific setup from the previous panel. So if you were hearing Taryn just now having that great conversation about AI, you're in the right place for really a really wonderful segue and follow-up to that conversation. AI, artificial intelligence, I mean, this is going to be part of almost every conversation we have in the coming years, whether it's access, whether it's policy, everything in between. But there's a really important component of the AI conversation that has to do with benefits. And that's really where we're going to be segueing in this next panel. And so I sometimes have conversations with folks who do work on social insurance who say, oh, I don't really know much about artificial intelligence. That's not my area. I'm not a tech person. I don't really get into that. Well, I would hazard to say at this point, we all have to become somewhat expert on these issues, because at this point, technology is policy and it is access, and you can't really separate these things out for reasons we're going to get into in this conversation. So in the past several years, I think folks are probably well aware, but just to set the table a little bit here as we bring in our panelists in a moment, in the past several years, artificial intelligence and a whole area of technology that sometimes is called benefits tech has really increasingly become a core aspect of the conversation, of the debate, and of the emerging kind of area of developments within public benefits and social insurance. There's a whole range of types of really critical programs and benefits that now use that type of technology, whether it's to determine who's eligible or in other rights impacting types of situations. And so as that has become an emerging shift, it really is now the case that we can't afford to ignore thinking about how these things fit in with the goals that we have for these types of programs, and also from both a risks and an opportunities perspective, how we as disability advocates care to and need to engage in those conversations. So what we're going to be talking a little bit about today is it's going to be something of a wide-ranging conversation looking at how AI and technology and benefits tech is in particular showing up, yes, within benefits, but especially within disability benefits, including those at the Social Security Administration. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. You're going to hear about some of that from our panelists, but we're also in particular going to look at this from both the perspective of the immense opportunities that this presents for addressing access challenges and speeding up access to critical programs, as well as some of the risks that are presented as we see more and more benefits tech and AI showing up. So you're going to hear really both of those perspectives from this amazing panel. And part of the reason that these are some of the folks you'll be hearing from today, and I mentioned each of them is involved with the Academy in various ways, is that in the earlier this year, in response to some of the increasing ways that AI and benefits tech is showing up in the benefits realm, but especially within the Social Security context, the Academy formed a task force that is called the Task Force on AI Emerging Tech and Disability Benefits, really with the goal of bringing together a whole cross-sector and bipartisan group of experts from pretty much every corner of the social insurance ecosystem to think about these issues and to ask the question, what would it look like if we got it right at the Social Security Administration, incorporating this type of technology? And what would it look like for us to think about the principles and the guardrails that need to be in place? So this is some of the broader context behind why this group came together to speak to all of you today, and I'm going to bring each of them in turn into the conversation, but I'm first just going to quickly introduce each of them. You heard their names, but a little bit about where each of them is from. Jack Smalligan, who is sitting immediately to my right, is with the Urban Institute and is one of the co-principal investigators of the task force that I mentioned. Henry Claypool, who's on the end there, is with the American Association of People with Disabilities and also does a lot of work with the Center for Democracy and Technology. He's also one of the co-chairs of the task force. Darren Webb, who's sitting right here to Jack's right, is the CEO of Mindset Care. He is also a member of the task force and just doing some really exciting work outside of government, innovating and putting some of this kind of technology to use to solve some of the problems, the access problems that people face with SSI and beyond. And then last but certainly not least, we have Dom Kelly, who is the founder of New Disabled South and is also a member of the task force. So without further ado, I'm going to first kick it over to Henry. Henry, I would love for you to help set the stage a little bit before we zoom in more into Social Security in particular. I mentioned some of the broader landscape, which I think folks are no stranger to, but you've been doing an immense amount of work in recent years when it comes to the intersection of tech and disability rights. Talk a little bit about how AI has been showing up in rights impacting contexts in particular that impact disability rights.
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you, fellow panelists, for this opportunity to share more about AI. It's really important that we have these conversations and enlist more people in the work here. Hopefully, you won't hear this as intimidating because we can all engage in shaping what AI is becoming. So please take that away from this panel. But the work that AAPD does along with the Center for Democracy and Technology, we're really looking at areas where the technology has been deployed and is being used and impacting disabled people. And so we've identified a number of areas in the employment context and benefits management, in finance, applying for a loan, accessing housing, our criminal legal system, where people's rights have been negatively affected by AI systems. Why is that? Largely, it's because the technology is developed without disabled people in mind. So from the beginning, we are probably at a disadvantage. We're not really included. We're an extraordinarily diverse population, and this technology is driven by data. So compounding the diversity that we have representing our population is this idea that we need more information about that. Unfortunately, we don't do a very good job in this country or in most parts of the world in capturing data about disabled people, how they live and what they interact. And this is all the fuel that informs how AI systems work. So those are really fundamental challenges. They're really not designed, and we don't have great data on the population. So we're not surprised when we see these negative impacts, like in an employment setting. You may be applying for a job online, and you'll interact with a system that isn't even accessible to you. It's a remote interview, and you're asked to navigate a keyboard, but if you can't function well with your hands and pushing the keyboard, then guess what? The system isn't going to work very well for you. So this core issue of accessibility comes up also in the design of these systems. And so much of our work has really been documenting these cases and talking about how the rights of disabled people have been impacted by technology that isn't designed for them, but in fact, people find themselves forced to interact with it. I guess a final example would be around benefits management. It's more specific to the Medicaid program and the home and community-based services that Medicaid offers. You know, those are the services that are offered in one's home and really the lifeblood of many folks that rely on Medicaid. There's something called a functional assessment that one undergoes to determine how much need you have for the type of support you're going to receive in your home. These are algorithms that ask you a series of questions, and then you spit out answers, and then at the end of answering all the questions, you get a better idea of how much need the person has for services and supports in their home. Well, these things are being automated by some states, and there really isn't a great deal of attention paid to the fact that we don't have good data going in, we're not really looking very closely at individual need, and these algorithmic systems are, in some cases, taking services away from people that have relied on these services for long periods of time. So while we are focused on identifying these harms, we do want to help build these AI systems in ways that they can work. It's going to take a lot of work, and I think a good point of why NACI brought together this study panel or this task force, I guess, to make sure that we're starting to document better ways to do things and making recommendations that hopefully Social Security Administration will pick up.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Henry. A really great place to start. And as you're emphasizing, and you're starting to get into this already, right? AI is fundamentally a neutral tool, right? It's all in how we shape it, which means there are opportunities to position it and use it to help people with disabilities in a variety of ways, many of which people are already familiar with and really seizing. But there are also real pitfalls depending on how it gets used. And you started to preview that a little bit from some of the references you made to Medicaid and other places, whereas AI gets used to make decisions, right? I mean, these are really high stakes decisions for people, and it's really important that disabled people be at the table in shaping how these tools get designed and used. Dom, I feel like that's a great place to bring you in next. AI and technology have really become a growing pillar of New Disabled South's work, and you're a relatively new organization, but you have already are at the forefront of really leading the way on a whole range of different issues and organizing the whole South in the process, right? It's been wonderful to watch NDS grow. Talk a little bit about how you and New Disabled South come to this issue and what opportunities you see. And maybe we'll start a little bit with the opportunities side when it comes to leveraging tech and AI to improve life for disabled people and including in the benefits context.
Sure. Well, thank you, Rebecca, for having me be a part of this panel. I just want to give a brief visual description of myself. White man, brown curly hair, wearing gray pants and cool-looking rockabilly shoes and a multicolored polo shirt and a mask on my face. I'll start with kind of sort of how we started thinking about AI. So when the very first thing that we did as an organization, before we were a fully announced, full-fledged organization, that I did was start to talk to disabled folks in our region just to understand the issues they were facing, the things that they cared about, the things they wanted to see, like an org that was doing the kind of work that we were doing address. And one of the big concerns was how fast technology is moving and how to keep up. And then, of course, issues of how do we get access to Medicaid, how do we get off waiting lists, things like that. So the first project that we started when I announced that NDS was a thing was to develop a policy dashboard that is powered by AI to make bills easy to understand. So it essentially translates legislation into plain language using both AI and a human, because we know that the AI is not perfect and we need that human kind of quality check. And I will say that my understanding and grasp of AI was so minimal. It felt very overwhelming to me. I didn't fully understand it. And the next sort of time that I started to see oh, this is actually being used already was when we started to look at waiting lists for home and community-based services in Georgia, and in trying to investigate and gather data from the Department of Behavioral Health, I found out that the algorithm that they use to determine who gets HCBS, who is on the waiting list, who even qualifies in general, that I had no idea. They couldn't even explain to me the way that it worked, and that was really alarming to me. And so for us, a theme emerged, which is that one, we are working with a region in this country that has 1/3 of the disabled people out of this entire nation. So the highest density of disabled people in this country, to majority people of color, and the states with the highest poverty rates in this country. So when we started to investigate, we learned, using Georgia as our first kind of example, which is where I live, that there are more black folks who are waiting longer for Medicaid HCBS waivers than white folks, and more white folks getting waiver services. And this is in large part due to algorithms, the algorithm that they use to determine who gets waiver services and who doesn't. And it brought up to us some real concerns about how this technology is being used, and also how, as technology advances, this will impact not only disabled people, but multiply marginalized disabled people. So I think in terms of opportunities, and I have so many risks I could talk about, because I'm still slightly skeptical. I think there are so many opportunities. There are opportunities to streamline how folks can actually apply, because we know that this is such a burdensome. You have to be a lawyer most of the time to understand how to navigate these systems. I can't wait for you to talk, Darren, about what you do. And I think there's an opportunity for us to raise a flag about, one, how this technology can be negatively impactful towards disabled people, how there are maybe inherent biases against people of color, against gender, and hopefully help improve the technology, because that is a big concern for me, but I think a big opportunity for us to be able to be actively engaged.
I appreciate that so much, and I promise there will be a chance to talk more about risks, although our time will fly by. Darren, that is where I want to bring you in next, because I think Dom just teed you up beautifully. You come to this issue, and I've gotten to know you in the course of the past year as just a brilliant innovator when it comes to putting technology to use to expand access to benefits that are some of the hardest to access, right? I got my education in how you need to have a law degree to get SSI benefits when I was representing people in these cases, and it doesn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be that way. Tell the story behind how you came to found Mindset Care, and how have you been putting tech and AI to use to help more people access SSI benefits?
Definitely, thanks so much. So I am a caregiver for a loved one with schizophrenia. He was released from jail, and as excited as I was for him to come back home with the family, I was just as excited for him to come home, get back on his benefits so I didn't have to continue paying for his mortgage, his car, his student loan, and everything else. Lo and behold, if you've been incarcerated for more than a year, your benefits are not just paused, they're thrown away. So I tried to help him reapply. I saw just how ridiculous it was. I printed 20 pages myself. I got in touch with 2 local disability attorneys, and they both mailed me about 2 to 3 pounds of paperwork to fill out. I called them both back separately, and I said, hey, can you just DocuSign this to me so I can get it to you quickly? And they had no clue what I was talking about. At that very moment, I knew that we had to figure out a better way to allow others to gain access to this system. And what we've done is we've essentially TurboTaxed the process of applying for disability benefits. We've created a technical platform that makes it really easy for anyone, a caregiver, those that are suffering, or even the representative, to upload their information and submit an application in under 45 minutes. So what could take you hours or days or even weeks to do, we get it done in under 45 minutes flat. And it's been a great experience meeting people from all over the country, helping people from all over the country, and just continuing on a weekly basis to just make it easier and more accessible for those that honestly deserve these benefits that are set aside for them.
And I'm so excited for where the partnership that we have with you is going to go, and with Dom and others, as we figure out how to expand what you're doing and bringing it to more folks in community. Jack, I want to come to you next, because we would be remiss if we did not do a little bit of a preview of some of what the task force has been up to, but also, we can't make this just a rosy conversation about opportunities. We have to talk a little bit about the need for guardrails and some of the risks. So I mentioned you're one of the principal investigators of the Academy's task force on AI, emerging tech, and disability benefits. And so in that role, you've been taking a really close look for the past several months at how tech and AI are being used in a range of benefits contexts, but especially at the Social Security Administration, when it comes to making decisions around who's eligible for SSI and for Social Security disability insurance. What can you share about how this type of technology is increasingly being used at SSA, and what do you see as opportunities but also risks?
Yeah, so I think I'd want to just emphasize that our report is draft at this point, so we definitely encourage people to continue to give us feedback. And I think it's easier to describe the opportunities because we're all aware of the extent of the backlogs that Social Security has, and the volume of medical evidence that many claimants bring, as well as the lack of medical evidence for other claimants. And so there's a opportunity for AI to be able to identify individuals who could have their decisions expedited. And I think at the same time, the risks are multifaceted. And with bias being the one that kind of pervades any kind of discussion, because I think we're all aware that there's bias in the status quo apart from AI, but there's a risk that AI tools can perpetuate and reinforce that bias. And there's also a risk that the human review aspect of the disability determination gets either removed or becomes perfunctory. And there's one terminology of automation bias, where the human involved in the process kind of defers to the AI application and sort of assumes that it's correct without second guessing that decision. So how we maintain a rigorous human element to it is important. And there's a risk of a lack of transparency and explainability. And so those are all sort of areas, and there's like 3 or 4 more I could describe that I think gives us caution, but I think the reality is that AI is advancing and that we face the risks regardless of how we approach the opportunities. So I think it's exciting that we have like Darren using AI in the private sector to help facilitate people's application for benefits. And we have opportunities at SSA that they're using that are still retaining the human element. And that's why we've really developed a set of principles and guardrails to help kind of inform that process kind of going forward.
Yeah, and Jack, just to stay with you, because I feel like this is where some of the kind of newest thinking is happening, is really in this particular use case. One of the core issues, and you're speaking a little bit to this already, but just to underscore it, is a buzzword or phrase that is virtually ubiquitous at this point, human in the loop. The idea that the human must stay in the loop rather than fully delegating the decision-making process to the AI. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and why that's important, and any other principles or guardrails that you want to highlight are starting to come together in draft form from the task force's cross-sector work? Okay.
Well, I think it's useful to maybe contrast some of the examples that we heard earlier from Henry and Dom with the home and community-based services, because like some of these algorithm-based decision-making tools can essentially either have no human role or have a perfunctory human role. And so I think many of the examples we're seeing in some of the early applications are making that mistake. And I think to SSA's credit, the Imagine tool that is the predominant one that the SSA's disability examiners are using is still retaining that role for the disability examiner. It's using natural language processing and predictive analytics to help kind of identify cases while still ultimately deferring to the examiner. And it's being rolled out sort of as examiners are willing to use the new technology. And I think it's important to understand that when we talk about predictive analytics, we're talking about trying to judge from the available evidence whether or not a person is likely to be allowed. We're not predicting that they would be allowed. And we're also not predicting the future. There's a variety of AI tools that are designed to kind of predict whether a person would be a successful hire for a job or a successful loan application. And I think you see problems with AI where it's trying to predict future behavior. And Social Security is not doing that. It's really trying to predict, do we have enough evidence here to make a decision, or do we have gaps in the evidence that should be filled?
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Jack. And folks should stay tuned and also should feel free to reach out if you are working in this space, if you have thoughts in this space. The task force is still actively working and does appreciate feedback from folks across the community. Henry, I want to go back to you just because you have a lot of familiarity, a lot of expertise with how AI and benefits tech are being used in a range of different use cases. Are there any lessons that we should be learning from how it's been deployed so far and are there lessons that folks like policymakers at Social Security Administration should be learning when it comes to how to get it right?
Sure, I think fundamentals are important. And if you had the benefit of hearing Darren speak before, one of the keys is really thinking about the population from the outset, making sure that disabled people are part of the design team. Not only that, people with certain types of backgrounds. Again, you don't need to have a technical computer science background to really be expert in this work. If you have a decent understanding of disability rights, you can work with a team to identify where these systems might need to be corrected. And that's really part of the fundamental challenge here is building the tools in a way that work for the populations that are going to interact with them. So this idea of having a team that is diverse, not only disabled people, but as Dom mentioned, multiply marginalized folks, people of color that might be disabled, really will be impacted in ways that put them at a greater disadvantage. And so thinking about these populations and how they're going to interact is important to your design team. I think when the technology is going to be used, it needs to be accessible. That's one of the fundamentals that is often overlooked. There needs to be some transparency involved. You need to provide information about the artificial intelligence, what it's trying to do, how it works, so that people can understand, if I'm going to interact with this tool, maybe I need an accommodation, which is something that they're, in the employment context, guaranteed under the law. And therefore, you need to make sure you have information about the AI and what it's trying to accomplish and how it's being used. So these are some of the building blocks that need to be put in place to really have a functional tool that's going to be aiding decision makers in, again, things like benefits determination, employment. In our healthcare system, we see it being used a lot right now, and it's having pretty devastating impacts on people, and we don't know about it because there isn't any transparency. So I have a longer list, but I think those are some good ones to start with.
That's part of why we're so grateful for your leadership on the task force. Darren, also wanted to come back to you briefly before we run out of time. You've been learning a lot as you build this company very rapidly. It started as you in a basement, and now you have how many employees?
85.
It's and all within a very short period of time.
Under 2 years.
Yeah. So you've been learning a lot as you go, and I'm curious if you have just maybe a minute you want to share on anything you've been learning about what's been working well for putting tech to use to increase access to SSI that government should be learning from. Right. Often it's the innovation in the private sector that sometimes government can benefit from learning from.
Definitely. I could take up this entire panel specifically on that question. I think the main thing, and one of the main things, is claimant satisfaction. And right now, 85% of our claimants, when they either email or text message in, it's simply for an update on the status of their claim, nothing more. The other 10%, they're letting us know that they're on new medication, they're sending in medical records, and then the remaining 5%, they're calling to yell at us asking why is their claim taking so long. So with the 85%, we get thousands of emails and text messages a day, and our AI that we've built responds to them in real time to give them an update on the status of their claim. Via email, via text message, they can log into their Mindset profile to see the status. Right now, if you call Social Security and you want to update on the status of your disability claim, the average time is a 32-minute wait. That's just shouldn't happen in this day and age. So if we start with the claimant, if we understand that we are here to serve them, and understanding that this technology is readily available, if they want to build it in-house, if they want to utilize safe third-party tools, I think that's really where you need to start in allowing the claimants to be up to date on their own claim, which we've proven is possible.
Yeah, and there's so many more examples. I know where that came from. So in our last few minutes, what I want to do is just sort of do a down the line and offer each of you an opportunity for closing thoughts. And feel free to take these prompts if you want, or to take this somewhere else. Jack, I'll go to you, and then Henry, you'll get the last word. But anything that you are expecting on AI and tech and disability rights in the new political landscape and what may lie ahead in the coming chapter, or anything else that you want to say in closing thoughts regarding how the disability community should be thinking about engaging on these issues more broadly?
Well, I think we just need to watch carefully on whether or not AI is being used to help individuals with their claims and to help resolve their challenges, versus being used to winnow out and shift people off of applying for benefits? And so is it being used constructively to help applicants and to help beneficiaries, or is it being used in a means to impede access to benefits? And that's sort of a threshold issue to watch in the coming months and years. I think as SSA has been using it under the current leadership, I think there's a lot of constructive uses, and we just need to be vigilant on watching how that's handled in the future.
And Darren, I know you really could just spend an entire day up here talking about all the things you've learned, so I feel like it's unfair to keep putting you in a box of having to share just in a minute, but anything that's next for Mindset that you want to share?
You know, Mindset specifically is just to help as many people as we can on a daily and weekly basis. And I think that rolls into how we're thinking over the next quarter or two with the new administration coming in. I truthfully believe there's going to be a ton of less regulation around AI and tech. If you've seen lately, all of the tech CEOs are in Mar-a-Lago. I promise you they're not there asking to be regulated more. So, you know, that's something we're keeping an eye on, and, you know, we'll see over the next few weeks.
And Dom, anything you want to add about sort of how you think the disability community should be thinking about these issues when it comes to engaging in the next chapter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have concerns that sort of go outside of the disability community but deeply impact the disability community. And I think to infuse a justice perspective into this, it is the environmental impacts of AI, which in turn hurt disabled people. It is the racial and gender bias of algorithms that will hurt disabled people, right? So I think it is, as with anything else, there's tremendous opportunity and also a lot of harm that can be done. And AI is not going anywhere. So how do we use it to help our community to the best of our ability? I think these are like questions that I don't know the next administration is going to care about nor address, but I think we as a community, folks who work in this who are practitioners, I think have an opportunity to really think about all of those intersecting opportunities and risks.
And Henry, you'll get the last word as well.
Well, I would urge you all to engage in whatever way you can. It's not hyperbole to say that this technology is really reshaping how things are done in the world. It's true, it's happening right now. And the technical issues shouldn't be barriers. Bringing your voice, what you expect from the technology, to the conversation is important. And in this administration, I don't think we need to be too concerned about the disposition of them. I think we need to speak loudly about what our expectations are for the AI, that it needs to work for us, and that includes all of us.
Can't think of a better note to end on, so I know we could probably sit up here and spend another few hours and still keep having a wonderful, interesting conversation, but we're going to have to leave it there as we run out of time. Please join me in thanking our fantastic panelists, and stay tuned for the release of the task force's first report at some point next year. We will be sure to circulate it within the disability community when it comes out, and share information about how you can learn more and get involved. So thank you to the Harkin folks for wanting to have this conversation, and thank you to all of you for all of the work and leadership on these issues. Thanks again, guys, and we'll look forward to handing the stage to the next panel.